The word that shattered reality. The Zenith Council chamber floated in the void between stars, a crystalline structure that defied conventional physics. Its walls were made of quantum glass, allowing the assembled representatives to see the infinite cosmos while being protected from its harsh reality. Today, this magnificent chamber trembled with tension as the Universal Peace Treaty, which had maintained order for 10,000 years, stood on the brink of collapse. Ambassador Sarah Chen adjusted her environmental suit as she entered the chamber. At 35 years old, she was humanity's youngest diplomatic representative, chosen not for her experience, but for her unique ability to see patterns others missed. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her brown eyes held a quiet intensity that made even ancient alien diplomats pause. The crisis had been building for months. The Krellian Empire had discovered that the Vortanian collective had been secretly mining dark matter in disputed territory. The ethereal minds accused both parties of violating sacred space-time corridors. The Silicon Hive calculated a 97.3% probability of galactic war within the next solar cycle. Each species brought their grievances to the Council, and each demanded justice according to their own interpretation of the treaty. Sarah took her designated position at the human delegation platform, a modest section compared to the grand displays of older civilizations. To her left, the Krellian ambassador rippled with barely contained fury, its tentacles changing color from diplomatic blue to aggressive red. The being stood 12 feet tall, its cephalopod form encased in a water-filled exosuit that hummed with advanced technology. Across the chamber, the Vortanian delegation existed as a cloud of interconnected light particles, their collective consciousness represented by swirling patterns of energy. They communicated through controlled photon bursts, each flash containing volumes of compressed data that most species needed computers to decipher. The ethereal minds occupied no physical space but made their presence known through gravitational distortions that created hauntingly beautiful aurora displays. They were beings of pure thought, evolved beyond physical form millions of years ago, and they viewed the material universe with a mixture of nostalgia and disdain. High above, the Silicon Hive's representatives hung like geometric sculptures, their crystalline bodies refracting light into precise mathematical patterns. They were living computers, each individual a processing node in a vast collective intelligence that spanned 17 star systems. The debate began with traditional formalities, but quickly devolved into chaos. The Krellian ambassador's translator boomed across the chamber. The Vortanians have violated Section 3847 of the treaty. Their dark matter extraction threatens the stability of 3 inhabited systems. The Vortanian response came as a cascade of light pulses that the universal translator converted to sound. The Krellians speak of violations while their war fleets gather at our borders. They use this dispute as an excuse for expansion. An ethereal mind's thoughts rippled through the chamber like a cool breeze. Both species cling to material concerns while ignoring the damage to higher dimensional pathways. Your conflicts create distortions in realms you cannot even perceive. The Silicon Hive added their calculation-based perspective. Statistical analysis indicates that dissolution of the treaty is now inevitable. We compute 17 different scenarios, all ending in widespread conflict. Logic dictates we should begin preparing defensive protocols. Sarah listened carefully, her neural implant recording and analyzing every word, every gesture, every subtle shift in alien body language. She noticed something the others missed. They were all talking past each other, not to each other. Each species interpreted the treaty through their own cultural lens, unable to truly understand the other's perspectives. Hours passed. The arguments grew more heated. The Krellian ambassador's tentacles now glowed bright orange with rage. The Vortanian cloud flickered erratically, sending uncontrolled energy bursts that made the chamber's shields spark. Even the normally serene ethereal minds manifested as turbulent gravitational waves that made smaller objects float chaotically. Sarah stood up. The movement was so unexpected that several aliens turned to look at her. Humans were known for listening, for mediating, for finding compromise. They rarely took center stage in major disputes. "May I speak?" she asked, her voice calm but carrying clearly across the chamber. The council moderator, an ancient machine intelligence that had overseen proceedings for millennia, acknowledged her with a pulse of blue light. "The human delegation is recognized." Sarah stepped forward to the center of the chamber, the holographic treaty hovering above her like a constellation of rules and regulations. She looked around at the assembled representatives, seeing past their alien forms to the fear and confusion beneath. "For 10,000 years," she began, "this treaty has maintained peace by defining exactly how each species must behave. It has 4.7 million sections, covering every conceivable interaction between civilizations. But in all those words, in all those rules, there's something missing." The Krellian ambassador's translator gurgled skeptically. "The treaty is comprehensive. What could possibly be missing?" Sarah smiled slightly. "One word, one concept that my species discovered through millennia of conflict and cooperation. One idea that changed how we see ourselves and others." The chamber fell silent. Even the constantly calculating silicon hive paused their processing to listen. Sarah took a deep breath and spoke the word that would reshape galactic civilization: empathy. The universal translator struggled with the concept. To the Krellians, it rendered as feeling within other. To the Vortanians, it became light sharing light. The ethereal minds perceived it as consciousness resonance, while the silicon hive translated it as parallel processing of emotional data. But these translations couldn't capture the true meaning. Sarah saw the confusion on alien faces, the struggle to comprehend something so fundamentally human yet so universally needed. She continued, "Empathy isn't just understanding another's position logically. It's feeling what they feel, seeing through their eyes, experiencing their fears and hopes as if they were your own. It's the recognition that despite our different forms, different ways of thinking, different needs and desires, we all share something fundamental: the capacity to suffer, to hope, to dream." The Krellian ambassador's tentacles slowly shifted from orange to a confused purple. "But how can I feel what a being of light feels? How can the Vortanians understand the pressure of deep ocean existence?" "You don't have to feel exactly what they feel," Sarah explained. "You just have to acknowledge that their feelings are as real and valid as your own. When the Vortanians mine dark matter, they're not trying to harm your worlds. They're trying to feed their young, who consume energy in ways we carbon-based life forms can barely imagine. When you mass your fleets, you're not planning conquest. You're protecting oceans that have nurtured your species for millions of years." The ethereal minds manifested as gentle spirals of gravity. This empathy, it requires vulnerability. To open oneself to another's experience is to risk being changed by it. "Yes," Sarah agreed. "That's exactly the point. The treaty tries to keep us separate, to define rigid boundaries. But true peace doesn't come from separation. It comes from connection, from the willingness to be vulnerable, to let ourselves be changed by understanding others." The silicon hive's calculated response surprised everyone. "We are processing this concept. Initial analysis suggests that empathy could serve as a universal constant, a bridge between disparate forms of consciousness. It is inefficient, yet strangely optimal for long-term stability." The word spread through the chamber like ripples in a pond. Each species grappled with the concept in their own way. The Krellians' chromatophores flickered through a rainbow of colors as they experienced something unprecedented: an attempt to truly understand what it meant to be a being of pure energy. The Vortanians pulsed in patterns that mimicked the rhythm of Krellian heartbeats, trying to comprehend biological existence. Sarah watched as something extraordinary happened. The rigid positions that had seemed irreconcilable began to soften. The Krellian ambassador's aggressive posture relaxed. The Vortanian cloud's erratic flashing smoothed into gentle pulses. Even the ethereal minds descended closer to the physical plane, their presence becoming more tangible. "This concept," the Krellian ambassador said slowly, its tentacles now a thoughtful blue-green, It suggests that our conflict arises not from true opposition, but from failure to empathize with each other's needs. The third principle was perhaps the most radical. Conflicts shall be resolved not through rigid application of rules, but through genuine effort to understand all perspectives involved. Solutions must address not just immediate disputes, but underlying needs and fears. Implementation wasn't without challenges. The logic state entities initially rejected empathy as inefficient biological sentiment. However, when they observed that empathetic approaches resulted in more stable long-term solutions than pure logical calculation, they developed their own version, computational empathy, where they modeled other beings' emotional states with unprecedented accuracy. The predator guild struggled with empathy toward prey species. This led to profound philosophical discussions about the nature of existence, consciousness, and survival. Eventually, they developed the concept of honorable consumption, where the experience of prey was acknowledged and respected, leading to more sustainable and ethical hunting practices. Cultural exchanges flourished. The singing crystals of Beta Hydri began teaching their harmonic communication to carbon-based species, not for diplomatic advantage, but from genuine desire to share their unique perception of reality. Humans introduced the concept of art as emotional expression to species that had only known art as mathematics or functionality. The Vortanian-Krellian dispute that had nearly triggered galactic war became a model for the new approach. Working together, they discovered that their needs weren't mutually exclusive. Dark matter could be harvested in ways that actually benefited ocean worlds by creating stable gravitational fields. The solution required understanding not just what each species needed, but why they needed it. 6 months after Sarah spoke that single word, the galaxy was unrecognizable. Border disputes that had festered for centuries were resolved through empathetic mediation. Trade agreements incorporated well-being indices alongside resource exchanges. Military alliances transformed into mutual aid pacts. The ethereal minds, observing from their higher dimensions, noted something remarkable. The fundamental frequency of galactic consciousness had shifted. Where once there had been discord and isolation, now there were harmony and connection. They described it as the galaxy learning to sing in unison while maintaining individual voices. Not all changes were peaceful. Some species, particularly those built on rigid hierarchies or absolute ideologies, resisted the empathy protocol. The Dominion of Iron Stars viewed empathy as a threat to their authority-based society. However, even within their ranks, younger members began questioning whether strength truly required the suppression of understanding. The breakthrough with the Dominion came when their supreme overlord's offspring was injured in an accident. Traditional protocol demanded stoic acceptance, but Sarah arranged for medical specialists from various species to offer aid, not as political leverage but from genuine concern. The overlord, experiencing kindness without conditions for the first time, began to question the foundations of their society. Research stations across the galaxy reported fascinating developments. Xenobiologists discovered that species practicing empathy showed enhanced cognitive function and innovative problem-solving abilities. Theoretical physicists found that empathetic civilizations generated more stable space-time fields, as if the universe itself responded to conscious connection. The Silicon Hive made perhaps the most startling discovery. Their vast computational networks detected patterns suggesting that empathy wasn't just a social construct, but a fundamental force, like gravity or electromagnetism. They theorized that consciousness itself might be intrinsically connected, and empathy was simply the recognition of this connection. As the first anniversary of the empathy protocol approached, the Zenith Council convened for a special session. The chamber that had once crackled with hostility now hummed with collaborative energy. Representatives who had been enemies now worked together on shared projects. Sarah stood before the assembly, older in experience if not in years. Her simple human insight had catalyzed a transformation beyond imagination. But she remained humble, knowing that empathy wasn't humanity's gift to the galaxy. It was a universal truth that humans had simply been first to name. 1 year ago, she began, We discovered that our greatest strength isn't in our weapons, our technology, or our resources. It's in our ability to see ourselves in others, to feel with them, to understand that consciousness, in all its myriad forms, shares common ground. The Vortanian collective responded with harmonious light patterns. We have been so focused on our own survival that we forgot others also struggle to survive. Perhaps there is a way to share the dark matter fields that serves both our needs. The transformation was remarkable. Species that had been on the brink of war began to truly communicate for the first time, not just exchanging words, but sharing experiences, fears, hopes. The Krellians created holographic representations of their deep-sea cities, showing how dark matter extraction affected their tidal systems. The Vortanians demonstrated how their energy-based offspring required specific frequencies only found in dark matter decay. As understanding grew, solutions emerged. The ethereal minds offered to create dimensional buffers that would allow dark matter harvesting without disrupting oceanic worlds. The Silicon Hive calculated new extraction patterns that would benefit both species while maintaining system stability. The dawn of true understanding. The transformation that began in the Zenith Council chamber spread across the galaxy like a supernova's light, reaching even the most distant civilizations. News of the Empathy Protocol, as it came to be known, traveled through quantum communication networks, carried by traders, explorers, and diplomats who had witnessed something unprecedented: the complete reimagining of interstellar relations. Within days, the word empathy appeared in thousands of languages, each species struggling to truly grasp its meaning. The crystalline architects of Rigel VII spent cycles analyzing its molecular structure, trying to understand how a mere vocalization could carry such transformative power. The gaseous collectives of the Orion Nebula debated whether beings without solid form could truly experience what humans called emotional resonance. Sarah Chen found herself at the center of a paradigm shift she had never anticipated. Requests for clarification poured in from across known space. How does one implement empathy in trade negotiations? Can empathy be quantified for inclusion in legal frameworks? Does empathy require a certain level of consciousness to function? The first major test came when the hive worlds of Kepler 438 bits experienced a catastrophic solar event. Their star unexpectedly increased its radiation output, threatening to sterilize 3 inhabited planets. Under the old treaty, aid would have been calculated based on strict reciprocity agreements and resource exchange protocols. But the Empathy Protocol demanded something different. The aquatic symphonists of Tau Ceti, despite having no biological compatibility with the insectoid hive worlds, were the first to respond. They sent their massive water ships not because of treaty obligations, but because they imagined the terror of watching one star become a deadly enemy. Their message was simple: we know the fear of environmental catastrophe. We cannot let you face it alone. The response was overwhelming. The machine consciousness of Proxima Centauri diverted their entire solar collection array to create radiation shields. The Plant Mind Collective contributed biological filters that could process radiation. Even the xenophobic hunters of the Magellanic Clouds, who had isolated themselves for millennia, sent their fastest ships with radiation-resistant technology. The rescue effort succeeded beyond all calculations. More importantly, it created connections between species that had never directly interacted. The hive world's queen mind transmitted a message that their translators struggled to convey. We understand now. Empathy is not weakness. It is the recognition that all consciousness is precious, regardless of its form. Back at the Zenith Council, Sarah worked with representatives to codify the Empathy Protocol into the new Universal Understanding Accord. The document was revolutionary in its simplicity. Instead of millions of specific rules, it contained core principles based on mutual understanding and shared experience. The first principle stated, all sentient beings have the capacity for experience and suffering. This capacity, regardless of its form or expression, demands recognition and respect. The second principle followed. True security comes not from isolation or dominance, but from the acknowledgement of our interdependence. The well-being of one affects the well-being of all. The Krellian ambassador, its tentacles glowing with warm appreciation, responded, "Humanity's contribution wasn't the invention of empathy, but its recognition as essential to civilization's evolution. You showed us that true advancement isn't measured in technological progress alone, but in our capacity to connect across difference." The Vortanian collective pulsed in agreement, their light patterns now incorporating emotional rhythms learned from biological species. "We have learned that understanding requires more than processing information. It demands the courage to be vulnerable, to allow ourselves to be changed by what we learn." The ethereal minds manifested more fully than ever before, their presence warm and encouraging. The galaxy has begun its next evolutionary stage, not physical evolution, but the evolution of consciousness itself toward greater connection and understanding. As the session continued, plans were made for the future. Empathy education centers were established throughout known space. Exchange programs allowed beings to experience life through radically different forms of consciousness. The Great Library was founded to collect and share the emotional and experiential knowledge of all species. The military academies that once taught warfare now included courses on conflict resolution through empathetic engagement. Trade schools incorporated understanding of partner species' cultural and emotional needs into their curricula. Even artificial intelligences began developing empathy subroutines, becoming more than just tools but true participants in galactic civilization. The changes weren't just institutional. On countless worlds, individuals reported experiencing a new sense of connection to the cosmos. Depression and isolation decreased as beings realized they were part of a vast tapestry of consciousness. Creative expression exploded as species learned to appreciate and incorporate influences from radically different viewpoints. The most profound change was in how species viewed their future. Where once they had seen competition for resources and territory, they now saw opportunities for collaboration and mutual growth. The zero-sum thinking that had dominated interstellar relations gave way to abundance mindsets focused on creating value for all. Sarah's personal journey had been equally transformative. She had arrived at the Zenith Council as a diplomat trained in negotiation and compromise. She left as something more, a bridge builder, a translator not just of languages but of experiences, a living example of how one person's insight could reshape reality. As she prepared to return to Earth, now designated as the cradle of empathy by grateful civilizations, Sarah reflected on the journey. The word that had changed everything wasn't magic. It wasn't even uniquely human. It was a recognition of what had always been true, that all conscious beings, regardless of form or origin, shared the fundamental experience of existence itself. The galaxy had been transformed not by force or technology, but by understanding. And as civilizations looked toward the future, toward unexplored regions where new forms of consciousness might wait, they did so not with fear or aggression, but with openness and anticipation. For they had learned the greatest lesson of all, that in the vast, often frightening cosmos, the most powerful force wasn't the ability to destroy, but the capacity to understand, to feel, and to connect. The age of true galactic civilization had begun, built not on power or fear, but on a single transformative word: empathy.